Hello, and welcome to the Amongst Romans podcast, your window to everything Italy from an outsider's perspective. Join us each week as we navigate the Italian way of life and all the adventures that come along with it. Welcome back to Amongst Romans. Today, we're going to do something a bit different. We're going to dive into literature and travel, specifically the real Italian locations behind Shakespeare's plays. Now, William Shakespeare doesn't need an introduction. He has been proclaimed by many as the greatest writer that ever lived. Still, some scholars have doubts about his identity or if he even existed. But I won't be diving into that here. Shakespeare wrote about 37 plays during his life. Out of all those works, about a third of them take place in Italy. That's pretty random for a guy who has never set a foot on the Italian peninsula or is even rumored not to have traveled far from where he was born and lived. So, despite that, he brought Italian cities like Verona, Venice, and Rome to life on stage. And if you've ever wondered why so many of Shakespeare's plays are based in Italy, well, then this episode is for you. Now, I'm going to walk you through Italian locations that are featured in Shakespeare's plays. And if you're thinking of, you need a theme for your trip to Italy or you like Shakespeare, because some people do, then this post will help you do that. I think even if you're not really into Shakespeare or his plays, this will give you a different theme for your travels, and I think it's a fun one. So, why are so many of Shakespeare's plays set in Italy? I think that's a good question. You have to think of the time he was writing in. Like many other writers in his time and other times, he said many of his works outside of his native country and often in a different time from his own. Most of them were in the past or in a bit of a different time frame. There was a good reason for that. Fiction was often disguised as a commentary on politics of the day. We see this in other writers as well in different languages throughout history. Setting a story in a foreign land or a distant time was an excellent way to conceal your leader, your monarch, as the character in the play without directly offending them. It's also likely that if Shakespeare's political plays were set in England, they probably would have been censored. He was smart enough not to do that. It's also well known that Shakespeare's plays didn't come from his imagination, and he often found inspiration in other sources. He took existing stories, changed or modified themes, and added characters to suit the narrative. He then left the locations based on where the stories came from, like in Hamlet, for example, which is based on a prince in Denmark. So let's look at why Shakespeare loved Italy as a setting. There's about maybe a third of them based in Italy, which at the time of Shakespeare, Italy wasn't really a country. The Italian peninsula was made up of various city-states, and they were often at war with each other. Those city-states were ruled by powerful families and had dramatic histories, complex social codes, and lots of money and influence. It's perfect material for storytelling. So many of Shakespeare's contemporaries saw the peninsula as a place of violence and extreme passion where anything could happen. This made it a perfect setting for anything from a tragedy to comedy or a love story. Is it including some of the prejudices of the time? Absolutely. And I think looking back at it from a current view, it's a bit of a different take on the plays and where they're set. But I think at the time, he played on these existing prejudices because that's what they felt was the truth. Knowing that his audience would be eager to feed on the drama and emotions of the story, he played to that, which that makes him very good at knowing his audience. So Shakespeare likely based his knowledge on books, stories, and reports from other travelers. And he used Italy to explore big themes like justice, loyalty, love, corruption, and ambition, which are common not just in Italy, but I think that was just very convenient for his take. And it gave his place an exotic, glamorous feel while also staying rooted in familiar ideas. Now, if you're in the camp of believing that Shakespeare was not a real person or he was a pseudonym for someone else, you might argue this differently, but for this purpose, we're not really going to dive into that. Okay, let's dive into Shakespeare's Italy and go through all the cities that he featured in his plays. So I'm going to start with Verona. Verona is probably the most famous for Romeo and Juliet. Romeo and Juliet is probably one of his most famous plays. It's not the only play set in Verona. You also have The Two Gentlemen of Verona. So again, let's go back to Romeo and Juliet. Set in Verona, it's a story of two teenagers from feuding families who fall in love and marry in secret. The violence between these families leads to tragic ending. Now, we all know how the story ends, and whether you're romantic or you think this is crazy, it doesn't change the fact that the book is set in Verona. So in this case, Verona's tight walled streets and medieval setting match the tension and secrecy in the story. Now, when we look at The Two Gentlemen of Verona, which is also set in Verona, it follows Valentine and Proteus. They're two best friends who fall in love with the same woman. Her name is Sylvia. There's betrayal and confusion, but it ends on a happy note. So here, Verona feels a bit more innocent, where Milan, where much of the play takes place, represents a more worldly and sophisticated world. So again, if you're looking at it from a tourist context, I feel like Verona fully embraces the lore of Romeo and Juliet. Despite none of it being real, you can visit Juliet's house, her so-called balcony, and her tomb. Again, not real, just made up for tourists. These sites attract visitors from all over the world who come here on pilgrimage solely based on Shakespeare's play. As far as Milan, I don't think many people would associate it with Shakespeare. I certainly don't. Or it's a very different city from other parts of Italy and other locations that Shakespeare used for his plays. It's more modern, industrial, and a bit, I don't know, it's just different. It feels different to me. But, Milan has an international airport, so it's a great place to fly into Italy, especially if you are coming from outside Europe. It's a great place to fly into, and you can start your Shakespeare tour from here. So there is that. Now, the next one is Venice. Venice has The Merchant of Venice and parts of Othello. So again, it's looking at a city from a perspective of Shakespeare's contemporaries, right? So in The Merchant of Venice, we have a guy named Bassanio who borrows money from a Jewish moneylender so he can woo a woman named Portia. Now, he can't repay the loan, and Shylock, the moneylender, demands a pound of flesh. Now, I'm not quite sure what that means. I didn't read that one. But long story short, Portia is disguised as a lawyer and she saves the day. Everything is well. At the time, Venice was a very powerful state. It was very commercial. There was a lot of money flowing through the city, a lot of merchants, a lot of shipments. Everything was coming through there. Venice was a mercantile economy, and it's central to the plot, and also had a very diverse population that's also set up the tension between the Christians and the Jews, as we see with the merchant and the guy who borrows money from him. So in that perspective, I think it's very interesting to set that play in Venice. Now, Othello is partially set in Venice. So Othello is a Moorish general in the Venetian army who secretly marries Desdemona. Now, Iago is another guy in the book who's jealous and cunning and manipulates him into believing she's unfaithful. Unfortunately, he believes him, kills her, and everything is very dramatic. So as I said, not the whole book is set in Venice. The play begins in Venice, and here we have Venice as a symbol of order and political control. But once the characters move to Cyprus, which is where the second part takes place, it's chaos, right? So again, we're looking at Venice as the place of reason, while Cyprus is this land where emotions unravel. It's a very interesting take on the contemporary perception of places like Venice and Cyprus. I would say that Venice has an allure about it. It was a very wealthy city-state, and it hasn't really changed much over the centuries. So when you're walking in the streets of Venice today, you are probably walking the same streets, the same canals, the same bridges as people have done for centuries. So I think Venice is the perfect setting for romance, mystery, or even a spy thriller. And if you haven't listened to our episode on James Bond, I encourage you to listen to it because there we dive into James Bond's connection to Italy, which also has a connection to Venice. Now, let's talk about Padua. Padua is where Taming of the Shrew takes place. So it's a very famous one. I feel like that one has been done many times. Depends on your age. You might be more familiar with the play or the retelling of the story. I've had it in many different movies, but not always set in Padua. So this one, the original one, is set in Padua and tells the story of Catherine. She's a sharp-tongued woman and she has a younger sister named Bianca. So everybody's in love with Bianca, trying to date her. And Petruchio, I don't know if I'm pronouncing these names right, but Petruchio is the one who tries to tame her into a more obedient wife. So again, it's a funny story, sort of at the time, I guess. It's quite interesting. And, the setting also makes sense. Padua was known for its university and scholarly life. So the setting here plays off the themes of control, education, social rules. And I think it could have been set in different places in Italy, but I think at the time, maybe Shakespeare was more familiar with Padua as opposed to another city in Italy. So from that perspective, Padua is a great place to explore. And, I don't know if its only claim to fame through Shakespeare would be The Taming of the Shrew. It's the only play he had set here, but I think it's a very popular one. So I'll be curious to see how he picked that one. But like I said, Taming of the Shrew is set in Padua, and Padua is a great city to explore as well. Now let's head to Sicily. Shakespeare had 2 plays set in Sicily, and they're slightly different. So again, Sicily is a place that's mystical. It's very far away, and Shakespeare's contemporaries probably have not been there, right? Not all of them, if any at all. So the first one is Much Ado About Nothing, and that one is set in Messina. Messina is a coastal town in Sicily. The story follows 2 couples. One is Beatrice and Benedict, who spar with witty insults but secretly are in love with each other. And the second couple is Hero and Claudio, and whose wedding nearly falls apart due to false accusations. So again, we have lots of eavesdropping, gossiping, mistaken identities, fake death, very dramatic, very over the top. But all of that leads to a double wedding in the end. So in this case, Messina's relaxed pace and warm climate are the perfect fit for the mix of comedy and seriousness. I love the vibe of Messina. It's a very nice city. I definitely recommend visiting. Chances are, if you're coming to Sicily by ferry from the mainland, you are probably going to come through Messina. I know we did when we were going on a road trip. Messina is very nice. It looks very surprising to me because I didn't know too much about it, but Messina looked very nice. There's lots of things to see and do. I definitely think Messina is worth visiting, especially if you're coming to Sicily and you want to start your adventure here. That's a great place to start. Now, The Winter's Tale is also a play that's set in Sicily, at least for part of it. Winter's Tale is about Leontes. He's a king who wrongly accuses his wife of cheating. She dies, their daughter is abandoned, and he is consumed by guilt. Again, lots of drama, lots of mistaken stories and gossip and all that stuff. So years later, the truth comes out and the family reunites. Eventually, it ends on a positive note, I would say. But Sicily, again, in this case, represents pride and jealousy in the first half, because in the second half, they move to Bohemia, which is a more forgiving and lighthearted setting for the story. Now, the next one we're going to talk about is Rome. I don't think you can have any plays, books, or movies set in Italy without at least some of them being in Rome. The Eternal City has captivated Shakespeare's contemporaries just as much as it still does us today. Now, Shakespeare set 3 of his plays in Rome, which is something when you think about it. The most famous is Julius Caesar, and it follows the plot to assassinate Caesar and the political fallout after his death. Brutus, one of the conspirators, believes he's saving the Republic, but it leads to a civil war and chaos takes over. He features the Roman Forum and the Capitol as key backdrops to the play. Rome here represents politics, ambition, and betrayal. I think that's the same theme that kind of goes into the next one, which is Carolanus. Carolanus tells a story of a Roman general who's been banished after clashing with the people. He's angry and proud and joins Rome's enemies to get revenge. The play explores conflict between the ruling elite and the common people, which might not be so uncommon in Shakespeare's world, right? We have the queen, the ruling elite, and the common people. So this is a great way to maybe touch on some of those issues, but do it through a different story and still get the point across. Rome here is shown as divided and unstable. As we know, everything would happen with the Catholics and the Protestants. In England, we can kind of see the comparison here as well. The next one is Titus Andronicus, and this one is a very violent play. You have murder, revenge, and cannibalism, which is, I think, a bit much even for Shakespeare. If you haven't read this one, and I don't necessarily recommend doing it unless you are really into gore because it's a bit much, this one, like I said. So in this story, we have Titus, who is a Roman general who returns from war. He ends up sacrificing a prisoner, which leads to a brutal cycle of revenge. So Titus's family is attacked. He responds with horrifying violence. Basically, it's just death, murder, and cannibalism, like I said. And Rome here is seen as dark, cruel, and lawless, more like a Gothic fantasy than a historical city. And I think all of those things could be true. These things probably were true about Rome in a certain time anyway. So I don't necessarily think that Shakespeare is reaching that far to portray Rome in a place that maybe seems way different than the reality. I don't think you need Shakespeare's influence to come to Rome. The city is so great and there's so many things to see that you probably don't even think about Shakespeare when you come here. Make sure you go by the Largo di Torre Argentina, where Caesar was assassinated. Shakespeare's play about his death gave us the famous Mark Antony speech of the French Roman countryman and the famous line "Et tu, Brute," which again is all fiction, never happened, but if you study these in school and you come to Rome, you will definitely think of those things when you're here because it's automatic, right? It shows you the influence that comes from different plays and books from a man who lived so many centuries ago and wrote plays that you might have learned about in school. Rome doesn't need much introduction. I think people who come here will come anyway. But if you want to add a little bit of an extra touch to your visit to Rome, you can always thank Shakespeare. The next one is Florence, and I'm actually quite surprised that there's only one of his plays set in Florence. I think during even Shakespeare's time, Florence was a very powerful place. The Medici family was very wealthy, so it would have been more familiar to his contemporaries than some of the other places he picked. But again, that could be done on purpose. So in Florence, we have All's Well That Ends Well. And it's a story of Helena who loves Bertram, who unfortunately does not return her affection. She follows him to Florence, tricks him into sleeping with her, and wins his heart. I mean, there's so many things wrong with the story, but I guess that's Shakespeare's version of a rom-com. So again, I don't think you need Shakespeare's influence to come to Florence, or you don't need him to be a reason to come here. For me, Florence is an amazing place. It's a great city to explore. It's a gorgeous city. I can see maybe why Shakespeare would have used it as a setting. So again, if you're looking at Florence as the center of courtly behavior, military action, the wealth, the power that's here, and you contrast that with Helena's really humble background. She comes, she sees her man, she wants him, she does what she wants. She achieves her goal at the end, no matter what that means, which also symbolizes the persistence, the determination. And I think you can assign that characteristic and motivation to the Medici family as well. They were after power and influence. And, in a way, I guess that could make sense. But like I said, I don't think you need Shakespeare's play as a reason to come to Florence. Florence is a gorgeous city, the perfect destination for art lovers. And we did an episode on Florence. So if you want to learn more about Florence, I encourage you to go and check that episode out. So now you have it. These are the places Shakespeare set his plays in. Each city reflects the emotion and conflict at the heart of the play. So we can see love, betrayal, ambition, and I think the cities he picked kind of reflect that. So again, Verona, we see the love, dramatic, but still love. We see the justice in Venice and ambition in Rome. And I think it's also important to stress that the plays also reflect how Shakespeare's contemporaries viewed them, right? So even if most of them have never visited these places, they had a perception of what a place like this would be like, or if they never heard of this place, but they knew sort of where it was, it would have made sense to them. If you said there's violence and there's passion and there is violence and murder and death, as much as love and betrayal and determination, it would have been believable to them, right? Not so much because they've been there, they've seen it, but that's what they were thought to believe. And that's what the stories, I guess, maybe what they had from people who have been there. So anyway, I think it would have made sense to them. And I think the locations were done on purpose and they were selected for very different reasons. And like I said, are quite interesting. So now if you're planning a trip to Italy and you love literature, visiting these places will add a whole new layer to your experience. Plus, I think it's a great theme for your vacation. All these cities are popular tourist destinations. You are likely to visit some, if not all of them. And I hope that this episode gives you a bit of a different perspective on when you visit. So like I said, if you want to add a little bit of a theme to it, this is a good one. You can read more on the blog about each location. I'm going to link the post in the show notes. And that way you can plan it out when you're coming to Italy, especially if you're looking for a road trip and you want to visit different places. I think that's a good one. Now, this episode will be our last episode of season 3. We'll be taking a little break as we deal with our house renovations and the move to Abruzzo. It's been a bit crazy dealing with different aspects of it. So unfortunately, we need to take a break, but we'll be back for season 4 with more great places to visit and more about Abruzzo. So I'm excited to share that with you. If you enjoyed this episode or any other ones, please share it with your friends and leave a review. It really helps others discover the podcast. I thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.